Hello, my name's Geoff Rayle. This is my screening room and film vault, and I worked on Swamp Thing, the Wes Craven motion picture, in 1981. To tell you real quickly how I got the job and what I did on the film, Wes Craven, I'd written to him in 1980, trying to get work on film productions. I majored in film production in college at the University of Georgia. After I graduated in 1980, I wrote to probably 200 different directors and producers trying to get any kind of work on a film production. One of the people I wrote to was Wes Craven, and at the time he'd only done about 4 films: The Hills Have Eyes, Last House on the Left, and Stranger in Our House, and one other film, which was 2 TV movies. He had not yet done Nightmare on Elm Street. I got a letter back from him, about a 5-page letter, saying that he was not working on anything himself at the time, but if he ever shot a film on the East Coast, he was living in California. He said if he ever shot a film on the East Coast, he would give me a call and give me a job on it. I thought that was nice of him to say that in the letter, never expecting him to actually shoot a film on the East Coast or remember that years in the future, you know. And about a full year later, at about 11:30 at night on a Sunday in April of 1981, I got a phone call, and it was Wes Craven. And he said, I'm down here in Charleston, South Carolina. We're getting ready to shoot a film called Swamp Thing, based on the comic book, the DC comic book. Before they even put me on the payroll, the girl said that I need you to go and pick up Adrienne Barbeau, the star of the film. I said, okay. And Wes put me on as a special effects assistant, doing fire, fog, bullet hits, and explosions and so forth, under my supervisor, Art Brewer, who was the effects man. In Charleston in April of 1981, it was a 7-week shoot, went into May. Cypress Garden or Magnolia Garden Swamps, which we were shooting at, or the Fairlane Plantation. Those were the 3 locations in Charleston that we were shooting Swamp Thing. It was high humidity and over 100 degrees. Sometimes it got up to 110. Thick, heavy clouds of mosquitoes in the swamp every day to deal with. And so we asked some of the local fishermen, and they said, get a bottle of Avon Skin So Soft bath oil and douse yourself in it, and mosquitoes won't touch you. Rub it in. Literally, you could walk into the swamp, see the mosquitoes coming towards you, and they would just like bounce off this invisible shield around you. So it worked great. That was the perfect way of handling the mosquitoes. We also had to watch out for water moccasins, which were everywhere, and we had a snake wrangler on the set who would, if we saw a water moccasin, we'd say, "Snake wrangler," and he'd come and take care of the snake, bag it, everything. We all had to wear fishing waders, which came up to our chest with straps over our shoulders, because we were always waist deep in the swamp, dealing with the special effects, the fog and everything, while they were filming the actors on boats and so forth. Many times the boats were moving along with 2 actors talking in them. When they were recording dialogue, they couldn't have the motor running, so they were pretending the motor was running, and they had 2 of us on the opposite side of the boat, down below the edge of the boat with our head above the water level, and we'd be hanging on the boat, and another guy would be up here, and we'd be walking the boat. The camera was shooting from the other side so that they could record the dialogue without the motor noise. And many times I'd be pushing the boat along, and a snake would just swim by about water level right here in between me and the boat, but you just had to just keep going without saying anything because you didn't want to ruin the shot. We filmed in Charleston at the Aiken House, which was a 16th century house, where we filmed Arcane's mansion interiors for the film, the evil villain Arcane that's in the film. We also filmed at Battery Thompson, I think it is, which was an old Civil War powder magazine out in Sullivan's Island. Those were the main locations. The only place we saw alligator was at the Fairlane Plantation. That's where the Jeep crash in the Swamp Thing was filmed. That's where the opening helicopter shot, when the helicopter comes in and brings Adrienne into the swamp as the head of the CIA agency that's guarding Alec Holland at this special church that's actually a secret laboratory in the swamp. That opening helicopter shot was filmed at Fairlane Plantation. And then the majority of the film was shot at Cypress Gardens. That's where the secret laboratory was at. And That's where all the footage of the commandos going through the swamp and shooting people and chasing Adrian and so forth when they go after her was filmed. Magnolia Gardens, the pretty swamp, it had the flowery details and so forth. That's where we shot the love scene between Adrian and Swamp Thing, and 2 or 3 other scenes. That's where the Arcane's yacht sequence was filmed, where his yacht's floating down a waterway. That's also where we filmed the airboat chase and the airboat crash. And then I went on after that to work on the Kenny Rogers film Six Pack and some other movies, which I, ended up sitting on the set all day reading a book. And even though I worked 3 months on those films and made more money, it was the most boring experience I've ever had in my life working on those films, even though it was, of course, more comfortable interior filming and everything. The Swamp Thing I have the best memories of because I remember every single day of when we blew up something, when we rigged bullet hits on Swamp Thing, when we created massive, massive amounts of fog at night. Wes was a great director to work for. He never got angry, never blew up. He was always very sociable. When there was a break between setups, he'd come over and talk to me, or I'd go over and talk to him. He was very much into computers at that time, which was a new thing. Nobody had home computers. He had just gotten one, which was little more than a word processor at the time. And he was talking to me about how his new computers worked. He wanted to talk computers most of the time. That was what his big interest was. Michael Uslan, the producer of the film, was the one who had purchased the rights from DC Comics of Swamp Thing and Batman and Vampirella. Those were his 3 purchases. And he was a lawyer who had worked on Apocalypse Now and some of the Rocky movies prior to. This was his first job as a producer instead of a corporate lawyer for the film production. And he was wanting to make a comic book film. And so before he did Batman, before he took on producing Batman, he wanted to get his feet wet by doing a smaller film, Swamp Thing. And so he did Swamp Thing, and then later he produced the Michael Keaton Batman films that filmed later on. Swamp Thing came out fairly good, but it was an incredibly low-budget film produced and financed by Avco Embassy, which went bankrupt a couple of years after Swamp Thing. Avco Embassy could only afford about $3 million to make Swamp Thing, and Wes thought that once they saw the footage he was shooting that they would roll out more money, so his script was actually more ambitious than a $3 million production. As we were getting towards the end of the film, he was not finishing the movie, and he was waiting for them to say, okay, we'll give you so much more money. But then what they ended up doing was they sent some of their corporate people to the set saying, we're not giving you any more money. Either finish this film on time or we're going to shelve it and it'll never get released. So Wes ended up having to literally tear big sections of the script out and rewrite sections of it. That's why if you watch Swamp Thing the movie, it starts out great for the first 45 minutes, and then it slowly turns into a fist fight between 2 rubber-suited guys at the end, because the ending that Wes wanted was way too expensive for the film, and they had to literally cut it out. The suit on Swamp Thing, everybody asked me why it looked so baggy. First of all, that was not part of my job. That was the makeup effects department. They had a tall, very thin black man who was the actor who was supposed to play Swamp Thing. And they had done a full plaster cast of his body and done the latex suit molded exclusively for him. And he was very muscle-bound, but very slim and very tall. And at the last minute, he backed out of doing the part because he got another job somewhere. And so they had to find a stuntman that was relatively the same size to be in it, but there was no time to do a plaster cast of his body and create a suit for him. And so they ended up making the suit that had been made for one guy work on another guy who was slightly shorter and more stocky, and so they had to let the suit out and sew it together. And it basically makes it look in the finished film like a guy walking around with a Swamp Thing rubber suit on with baggy pants, you know. Yeah. And so that's a negative point on the film, which nobody had any control of. We had to just start shooting. We had to live with how it looked. It was my first film, and I thought all films will have me doing bullet hits and fire and fog and explosive wiring and everything every day. It was 7 weeks of pure hell, very hot, humid conditions, but the fun part of it was, at the time, I didn't know it was going to be the most fun I had working on a feature film.